This is a video about Skirk. Skirk is a bombshell ice queen in thigh highs with TSB. For most people, that's all they need to hear before they bust out their credit cards. But not a lot of people are comfortable admitting their decision-making process begins and ends there. And they need some copium injected through their eye and ear holes so they can justify their purchases without outing the depths of their hedonistic desires. If that's you, or you legitimately want to know the ins and outs of the character, aka are still uncomfortable admitting it's you, I'm here to help. And we about to go places with this one because this character gives me an excuse to talk about a lot of things I've been considering making videos about, but we're missing the glue to piece them into a coherent video. And based on what I've seen on Twitter lately, Skirk is a primo choice for producing sticky liquids. I'm sorry, that one was a bit much. Anyway, let's get the general information out of the way. Despite what Hoyo wants you to believe, Skirk is a Cryo character. She uses a sword. You hit the skill button and her sword swings get bigger, colder, and stronger. Her actual burst probably has the coolest animation in the game, so it's a shame you'll pretty much never have a reason to use it. Instead, what you'll be doing most of the time is her alternative burst. When you tap Skirk's elemental skills, she can do a different version of her burst that puts her in a special state that makes her attacks even stronger based on how many void rifts, something we'll talk about later, she absorbs when casting it. Important note, the special burst does not do damage. Remember that because it'll come up later. Skirk does not use energy recharge at all. That's not just relevant for the new artifact set, but also for Mistsplitter, which is great because once you have Skirk, you'll never want to play Ayaka again anyway. Now for the juicy stuff, starting with her restrictiveness. Skirk's Ascension 4 passive gives her increased damage when Cryo or Hydro characters deal Cryo or Hydro damage. So unfortunately, animal characters like Chaska, Venti, and Kazuha that can deal those forms of damage will not gain stacks from her passive. Excluding Skirk, each character in your team that is either Hydro or Cryo gives 1 stack when they do the damage of their element. And trust me on this, you want those stacks. With someone like Chevreuse, you're locked out of her res shred by not adhering to her restriction, but you still get her attack buff, her C6 buff, and her healing if you decide to run someone like Farina with her, despite her restriction. Most enemies in the game have 10% resistance, and res shred is half as effective below 0, meaning her restrictive passive will generally boost your damage by around 25%. If the character you're adding, like Farina, makes up for that 25%, it's fine to break that restriction. Similarly, we have Escoffier, who reduces resistances in increments based on how many characters are Hydro and Cryo. With 3 Hydro and Cryo characters, including her, she reduces resistance by 15%, but add a 4th and she reduces it by 55%. But until now, playing Freeze without an animal crowd controller was scuffed beyond belief. But hey, VV reduces resistance by 40%, which just so happens to be the amount you miss out on from not including an animo character. Weird, it's almost like Hoyo actually tries to provide game balance. However, that is not the case when it comes to Skirk. You see, like I mentioned with Chevreuse, res shred typically isn't going to be the amount stated. Most enemies have 10% resistance, which means that 55% you're getting from either maxing Escoffier's passive or including a VV shredder will generally equate to around a 32.5% increase. In contrast, that 50% difference from having 4 Hydro or Cryo characters instead of 3 is actually straight up a 50% increase to her damage because it modifies the motion values, the skill multipliers, at the base of the calculation, and that's for all of her damage. Normally, we see additive bonuses. Like if you have a 46% elemental goblet and add a 15% 2-piece of that element, the damage percent is stacked to 61%. Instead, what's happening with Skirk is that the talent multiplier is being multiplied by the value for the number of stacks. So instead of these numbers, they'd be these numbers with 2 stacks and these numbers with 3. No matter what combo you're using, the end result of the combined motion value will always be 50% higher with a full team of Hydro and Cryo than with a character of another element, except not really, it's even worse than that. In addition to allowing her to get all 3 stacks on that passive, having all Hydro and Cryo characters with at least one of each also increases her and every other character's skill talent level by 1 with her 3rd passive, increasing all of those multipliers by 7% of their original value, making the actual difference between 2 and 3 stacks 51.6%. And given that she and 2 of her best teammates really like having stronger skills, that passive pulls weight. So instead of a 388.68 multiplier for the last hit increasing to 466.416, you get a 416.11% multiplier increasing to a 707.39% multiplier. And that's a much bigger hurdle to make up for than losing 25% with Chevreuse from ignoring her restriction, or gaining value by adding Kazuha with Escoffier for anyone but Skirk. Is it impossible? No, and in fact the biggest single hits of damage you'll see will still be from melt setups, but the rest of her damage suffers so much that it makes it difficult to recommend teams that violate her restriction. But now you might be wondering, if Skirk is that reliant on having only Cryo and Hydro characters, why does her Ascension 1 passive create Void Rifts when Superconduct, Swirl, and Crystallize are triggered in addition to Frozen? Because this passive is how Hoyo has finally fixed Cryo. It's the same design philosophy that was used for Navia, Chevreuse, Emily, and Auroron. Rather than improve the weaker reactions of Crystallize, Overload, Burning, and Electrocharge, these characters make your team stronger just for those reactions occurring. The same applies for Skirk. What's Freeze's biggest downfall since 1.2? Enemies that are unable to be frozen. We normally just think of bosses when it comes to this, but it also applies to enemies with innate auras and shields, because your Cryo will react with that aura or shield instead of triggering freeze. Skirk's ability allows her to create Void Rifts with or without triggering frozen, and it's important to note, bosses may not be able to be frozen, but you can still trigger frozen on them. So she's basically fixed freeze by making it to where freezing enemies isn't necessary. The problem up until now has been that Cryo Resonance and Blizzard Strayer rely on either the enemy having a Cryo aura or being frozen, and against these types of enemies, it can be impossible to do either, and against bosses, triggering frozen removes any Cryo aura you might have, nullifying the effects of Cryo Resonance and Blizzard Strayer. These reactions create Void Rifts, and Skirk's ability to absorb them with her special burst gives her additional damage percent depending on the number of Void Rifts the burst absorbed. Important note, absorbing rifts with her charged attacks does not trigger the bonus damage from absorbing them with her burst. It just gives the bonus burst gauge you would have gotten if you just used her burst, which just means more field time. It is important to at least get one rift to allow you to extend her field time by the 2 seconds of downtime that characters like Furina, Shinha, and Xingqiu would have otherwise, but pushing it beyond that means less uptime on the rest of your character's abilities. If you absorb them with her burst, and her burst gives you bonus damage on top of it, and the charge attack is slower with lower multipliers, the charge attack really isn't worth doing prior to C1. Even without absorbing anything when she uses her burst, she still gets 8% at talent level 10 from having all Cryo and Hydro teammates, and as high as 20 damage percent from triggering every Cryo reaction but melt. So, unlike her charge attacks, it's always worth doing. Why not melt? Well, because you already get a bonus from the reaction damage while melting. It's almost like Hoyo actually tries to provide game balance. For testing, I think that I and pretty much everyone else has been sleeping on Burst Spot Skirk a little bit too much. After testing it a little bit, I decided to run the calcs for Furina, Escoffier, Shinhan, Noblesse, and was getting, with Wolfang R5, and was getting 890, 641,000 damage per rotation. And that was with 69 Serpent Subtlety, not even max. So I think it's a lot better than anyone's giving it credit for right now. And I can't record over the entire video again of me downplaying the burst, but it's all right. That said, I think it does pretty much require some combination of all the best 5 stars for her to work, but it's all right. Like, if you just need a little bit of damage to finish off a chamber, I think that's probably going to be the place where it shines the most. But I wouldn't sleep on it. I think it's way better than anyone's giving it credit for. Given everything we just discussed, what artifacts would you say are her best choices? Well, given that Skirk is designed around being able to tackle content Freeze historically couldn't, Blizzard Strayer is actually kind of a trap. The 2-piece bonus is good, and you can't go wrong with 15 extra damage percent to all of her damage, but you can't depend on having a Cryo aura or the Frozen status. Theoretically, Blizzard Strayer is amazing because theoretically, we can assume it's always active along with Cryo Resonance, but practically, it isn't. If we're actually being honest with our damage calcs, we do crit rate plus X, because crit rate will be some amount greater than stated on the stat page on average, but most certainly won't be anywhere near the stated bonuses of Resonance and Blizzard Strayer. What about Marechaussee? Well, the 4-piece bonus is useless without Farina. A lot of you, however, will be using her with Farina. So if you've got a Marechaussee set lying around for your Wriothesley, Ganyu, or Ayaka, you'll be alright using it instead of dumping your resin into her artifact domain. After that, Glad. Bonus 18% attack that applies to all of her damage. Bonus 35 damage percent that applies to all of her damage. It's great, and you constantly get free pieces just for playing the game. A bit more out there is Harmonic Whimsy. Still 18 attack percent, and if you're using Finale of the Deep, you get 2 stacks of it, which makes it technically have 1 more damage percent than Glad, but you have a lot more pieces of Glad, so the substats on your Glad pieces will more than make up for that 1%. Lastly, and we should have all seen this coming, Finale of the Deep calories. With the 4-piece set, you're getting an additional 75 extra damage percent, and since her alternative burst doesn't deal damage, you don't have to worry about this part where it says it disables the bonus after dealing burst damage. The damage percent multiplier modifies your damage in the same way crit damage does, minus being multiplied by your crit rate, meaning additional damage percent will almost always be more valuable than an equal amount of crit rate or crit damage. And that's the truth behind power creep in the game. Since Fontaine, new artifacts have simply outscaled old ones. Look at Marechaussee, 15% charged attack damage and up to 36% crit rate. Natlan comes around and we get Obsidian Codex, which is 15% to all damage and 40% crit rate. Scroll of Cinder City is a support set that gives an additional 40% to all damage from triggering reactions on or off field, compared to the previous highest damage percent provided by a support set with Archaic Petra at 35%. That required picking up a Crystallized Shard with the equipping character, and it refunds 6 flat energy, which essentially lowers Scroll's equipping character's burst cost by 6, which is massive. Characters are definitely being made more powerful, but we're kind of sleeping on how much of a role the power creep of artifacts plays here. And considering that we've been getting items that allow us to craft custom artifacts and now items to reroll stats, it's almost like Hoyo actually tries to. As for her weapons, obviously her signature. After that, you can take your pick between Haran, Mistsplitter, Lo-Fi, or Jade Cutter. As far as stats are concerned, the event weapon Calamity of Eshu can be better than a lot of her 5-star options in teams with any of these characters. Without them though, it's kind of trash. Black Sword is okay, but it suffers from low base attack, and attack is a stat that's in dire need of some extra support with Skirk. And bonus damage percent to normal attacks becomes kind of useless at C1. As always, it's normally better to just go with the weapon that balances your ratio the best, rather than getting hung up on a weapon sheet, because the same artifact stats are assumed for every weapon, and that can create a huge margin of error, as some weapons will maintain that balance better than others. The best gacha 4-star is going to be the Sturdy Bone, but it's pretty far behind even her free options in most cases. It does have high base attack for a 4-star, bonus attack percent, and grants bonus base damage to normal attacks based on your attack, so if you've got it built but don't have her best free-to-play options built, it'll be fine. For free-to-play, you're going to want Finale of the Deep and to run her with a healer, which is something you're a bit more likely to do anyway compared to running a shield with her. Speaking of healers, do you have to have Escoffier? No, of course not. Skirk is beyond dumb, and you can practically stack her teams with any combination of Hydro and Cryo characters to clear all the content the game has to offer. That said, if you have Escoffier, you definitely want to use her. Escoffier gives, on average, some amount greater than a 32.5% increase to all of your characters, including herself. Provides a lot of damage that is further buffed by Skirk's utility passive, and a lot of healing if you're in need of it for Farina or Finale of the Deep. Farina, really good, especially considering you want to run a healer anyway and all of her damage comes from her skill, which, reminder, Skirk will be buffing. Her only problem is that, as a solo Hydro, you'll often want to do skill, normal attack, burst when you get the Skirk, because 3 Void Rifts are unlikely to have been created by the time you get to her. Shinha, also really good. Boosts damage, reduces resistance, gives damage percent, no notes. Yelan, also no notes. Provides a metric ton of damage on her own while Skirk normal attacks, and a ramping damage percent buff. I will say, if you don't have any of these characters, your Skirk is probably gonna feel pretty weak. You'll still be able to clear content, but the difference between having any of these characters or combination of them and not having any of them is night and day. Sweet Lolly is actually kind of being slept on because she doesn't reduce cryo res, but her ability to provide a shield, even though it's weaker than a C4 Yanfei shield with an ER Sands and Prototype Amber, so you can use Calamity, give Cinder City buff, and hold TTDS Starcaller's Watch Your 1,000 Floating Dreams is actually kind of huge, and she will reduce resistance for your Hydro characters. As for 4-stars, it seems like Mika is also being slept on. If you don't have Escoffier and are running her with Farina or Finale of the Deep, he'll provide all the healing you need in addition to up to 26% attack speed at C5 with Skirk's talent level boost. Since we're talking about attack speed, let's talk about Dahlia. Dahlia's attack speed caps at 20% until C6, which you're unlikely to have unless you went for Skirk cons, which, if you did, that attack speed won't matter when you're doing charge attack spams, but we'll cover that later. Unless you need a shield for Calamity, there's not much of a reason to run Dahlia over Mika. Thanks to Skirk, Mika matches his attack speed buff with 6 levels into his skill without C5, and only 3 levels into it with C5, so at talent level 7, just to be clear. And due to hit lag and the recovery time on her N5, it's kind of the sweet spot for hitting 3 full combos during her field time. I will say, Dockhand's Assistant is great for Dahlia thanks to its HP percent substat and ability to refund energy if you do decide to play him. Attack speed is one of those stats that, if you're coming from something like Diablo or League, is kind of hard to wrap your mind around, because in those games, it's pretty much considered a flat percent multiplier to your damage. But in Genshin, there are only a handful of characters that can even benefit from it, and they don't take up 100% of your field time. And the motion value changes every time you hit the attack button, so it wouldn't even be accurate to say it increases the portion of your overall damage made up by those attacks by whatever the percent attack speed increase they get is. That's not even to mention including an attack speed booster normally means excluding someone like Bennett. In Skirk's case, you can typically get in a 2 N5, N2, or N3, but around that 20% attack speed threshold, you can get a full 3 in 5 combo, which comes to roughly a 18% increase for her overall damage compared to 2 in 5 and 3. So on Skirk, it's actually pretty beneficial because the extra attacks being added are her in 4 and in 5, which have the highest multipliers. I should probably mention Mualani. It's kind of a meme, but she has all the same benefits Seat Lolly can bring, minus the shield and off field to help generate that third Void Rift before Skirk takes the field. Charlotte is okay if you're running Skirk with Farina or Finale and have C4 to potentially get away with running TTDS, but I'd only run her if you don't have Escoffier or Mika. Chi-Chi, Barbara, and Sejuani are kinda last resorts as far as healers go, but Sejuani will allow you to embrace the meme of Harmonic Whimsy if that's something you're interested in doing. Layla is actually a pretty good option if you're in need of a shield for Calamity. She'll buff a couple of your normal attacks throughout your rotation, is a solid tenacity user, and provides off-field to help get that evasive third Void Rift. Xingqiu is Xingqiu. I don't think I need to say anything else there. Candace is okay. She gives normal attack buffs and provides some off-field hydro, but her buff is seriously hamstringed by her energy requirements. I personally wouldn't bother with her if you aren't intending to run double hydro. Rosaria is very good for Skirk. Running Skirk's signature set can make it kind of hard to balance her ratio, and Rosaria can go a long way toward fixing that. Kaya, I wouldn't bother with him, even with C4 and Calamity, because you only get the shield once every 3 rotations. If you want to run him, he'll do fine, but he's not a piece any of her teams are looking to have filled. Diona is pretty mid for Skirk. She provides a shield for Calamity, but it's weak, and healing for Farina, but it's weak. The thing she has going for her the most is that she works well with the Song of Days Past. Finally, Chungus. I think there's actually a bit of room to experiment with Chongyun for Skirk. His cooldown reduction can tighten up some rotations. The attack speed isn't much, but it's enough for at least 1 extra normal attack, and the cryo res decrease isn't much, but without Escoffier or Shinha, it's the next best thing. And given that Child is the only enemy with less than 10% res, that 10% is 10% if he's the only res shred you've got. Now I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to do a C0 showcase while I explain her constellation to serve as a reminder that constellations on 5 stars are superfluous and a bad investment because each constellation is double the cost of the base character on average, but does not equal a 2 times return. Anyway, C1 unlocks charge attack spam for Skirk. Whenever a Void Rift is consumed, you deal an extra hit of charge attack damage with a 500% multiplier that kind of incentivizes running Farina, since you won't be driving Yelan or Xingqiu with normal attacks, and it increases the viability of Marechaussee. There are combos that will enable more Void Rifts to be gathered, but for the most part players are going to default to charge attack spam. In a 20-second rotation, you can generally fit 10 charge attacks and still be able to use your other units on cooldown and maintain enough stamina for other rotations. And you'll typically generate a Void Rift every other charge attack in addition to the 3 you'll consume from using her special burst. For simplicity's sake, we'll say without C1 you're doing 3 and 5, giving you a total motion value of 8,221.761%. And if we do 10 charge attack with 8 extra ice shards from C1, the total motion value would be 8,808.28, which amounts to a 7% increase for Skirk. Depending on the team, Skirk can be anywhere between 60 to 80% of your team's damage, so you're realistically looking at between a 4 to 6% increase to your team's total damage. Assuming you're already clearing chambers in 60 seconds at C0, you should be clearing 2 to 4 seconds faster. Is that worth double the price of Skirk? I'd say no, but that's just me. C2 makes her burst hit harder and gives her a 70% attack bonus when using her skill. Considering we are locked out of Bennett or Yunsan, we don't have a lot of bonus attack we'd normally be used to having. So that's pretty huge. Using either of her best free weapons brings her base attack to 923.77, so that 70 extra attack percent gives her a bonus 646.6 attack, which should come out to about a 25% increase to her damage. C3 gives an additional 3 talent levels to her skill, increasing those motion values by 25%, and thus should be another 25% increase. C4 is huge. It increases the stacks for her A4 to 120, 140, and 210 for her normal attacks, and 115, 135, and 200 for her burst. That 210 is what really matters. That's just a flat 40% increase. That may just be the biggest return on investment for any constellation. C5 increases her burst talent level by 3, which for our purposes really only means 3 extra damage percent on her combos. It's kinda garbage, but by this point, her actual burst has steadily been reaching a point where it's strong enough to fit her into cryo teams for other characters just to be able to see the pretty cutscene. Which, by the way, I haven't mentioned, but you can do. You'll want to hold skill, burst, and immediately swap out, but it's mostly a meme and only becomes less of a meme with each constellation. C6 adds a bunch of hits of damage to her burst. Her normal attacks when the 3rd or 5th in a hit, or a bunch of hits when she takes damage while charge attacking, which is what you should probably be doing after getting C1. So that's what we'll look at. Assuming you actually take damage 3 times, that'd come up to another 18% increase. If you are inclined to go for Constellations, which hopefully after seeing the C0 clears you've realized is a waste, C2 and C4 are the best pit stops to set. All of her Constellations, save for C5 unless you care about seeing her burst animation, are pretty good, and by C6 she should be doing over 2.85 times her damage at C0. Once again, is that worth 6 times the cost of the character? I'd say no, but almost a 50% ROI is pretty good by gacha standards, but only in gacha standards.